Hello, good morning, everybody. This is Dr. G.K. Kapoor, former professor, business and corporate laws, IMI, New Delhi. I have been recording a series of lectures on contract law in India. Today, I am going to record on free consent of the parties as one of the essential elements of a valid contract. Now, when shall we say that the consent of the parties is not free? I told you that one of the essential elements of a valid contract is that the consent of the parties must be free. So consent shall be said to be not free where it is affected by, say, coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, or mistake. In the first four situations, that is in case of coercion, undue influence, fraud, and misrepresentation, the contract is rendered as voidable at the option of the aggrieved party. That means if the aggrieved party so desires, that party can terminate the transaction. But that option is not available to the other party, that is the guilty party, if we may say so. Now let us, and in case of mistake, the contract is essentially rendered as valid, except in case of bilateral mistake. In case of bilateral mistake, the contract will be rendered as void ab initio, because in case of bilateral mistake, not that there is absence of free consent, but there is absence of consent altogether. We shall be talking about this in little more details at a later stage. But where the mistake is a unilateral mistake, the general principle is that the contract is not rendered voidable. So contract remains valid, but there have been a few exceptions recognized by the courts in this particular regard. That also we shall be taking up for discussion a little later. Now let us take up each one of the elements of free consent in little more details. And the first one we have talked about is coercion. What is coercion? Section 15 of the Indian Contract Act 1872 defines coercion as committing or threatening to commit an act which is forbidden under Indian Penal Code. Further, it includes unlawful detaining the properties of another. Now let us understand with the help of some examples here. Say for instance, X at the point of a revolver kept at point blank range threatens Y to sign a property deal worth rupees, say 50 crores for 5 crores of rupees only. Now, if out of fear of being killed, now Y signs that particular deal, the act of killing a person being forbidden under Indian Penal Code, therefore threatening to do that amounts to coercion. And the effect of coercion is that the transaction is rendered voidable at the option of the aggrieved party. So the party whose consent had been so forcibly obtained may, after recovering from the shock, might go and report the matter to the police and take other necessary action to repudiate the transaction, to avoid the transaction. Alternatively, the aggrieved party has the option to stay put and accept the situation as it is. He might well think कि जान है तो जहान है भाई, और बना लेंगे प्रॉपर्टी। और वैसे भी मैंने कौन सी 50 करोड़ में खरीदी थी, मैंने तो 3 करोड़ में ही खरीदी थी, मुझे तो फिर भी 2 करोड़ का प्रॉफिट है। So that's the option available to the party coerced. Now, a few issues that might well be raised. Is it necessary that the act must have been committed within the boundaries of India? That is where IPC, Indian Penal Code, is in force. The courts have held not necessarily so. If, say, for instance, 2 co-travelers on a ship from Mumbai to London, after the ship has crossed the specified nautical miles and is in no man's zone, now that Mr. X may take out the revolver or say a knife and say, if you do not sign this agreement, I'll shoot you down right here. Now here, in spite of the fact the IPC is not in force, but since the contract is supposed to be enforced in India, it shall be said to be affected by coercion. Again, it is not necessary that coercion be exercised by a party to the contract or against a party to the contract. Supposing a gunda may be hired and that gunda kidnaps the son of Y and threatens to kill Y's son if Y does not sign this particular deal with X. So here the threat has been given not by a party to the contract, nor has it been made against a party to the contract. Still, it shall be said to be affected by coercion. And lastly, here in coercion, I like to address a confusing situation that people find themselves in, and that is, what about a person threatening to commit suicide? Does that amount to coercion? Please remember, the rule of law is very simple, that committing or threatening to commit an act which is forbidden under Indian Penal Code is coercion. Committing of suicide is prohibited under Indian Penal Code, though for obvious reasons not punishable if successful. So if a person ever decides to commit suicide, one must be 100% sure of the means one is adopting. Because if one is not successful, then one might find oneself behind the bars. So unsuccessful attempt, that is an attempt to commit suicide, if it does not really result in a death, is punishable. Now, since it is forbidden, therefore, any transaction that has taken place because of this threat to commit suicide shall be voidable, having been affected by coercion. But please note that the contract must have resulted. If wife tells the husband, if you do not sign this business deal with my brother, I'll jump from the 15th floor of this building. And if the husband remains unmoved, refuses to sign, then in that particular case, the contract having not resulted, there is no question of any coercion. IPC may be applicable if the wife commits suicide, but there will be no coercion under Section 15 of the Indian Contract Act. Now, the second element of that free consent is undue influence. Undue influence means, just a second, I'm trying to open the slides for you. Undue influence. Section 16 says that for undue influence to be there, two requirements must be satisfied. That is, the parties must be related to each other in such a position that one party is in a position to dominate the will of the other. But merely the placement of the parties in such a position does not raise the presumption of undue influence. The second requirement will also have to be proved, and that is that party in a position to dominate uses that dominance to secure undue or unfair contractual advantage. If both these conditions are satisfied, then we shall say that the transaction is affected by undue influence, and the consequence shall be that it shall be rendered voidable at the option of the parties so unduly influenced. Remember, we are talking about the effect on contracts only. We are not talking about the undue influence in other situations or other relationships. However, Section 16 has raised the presumption of undue influence in certain situations. That is where one party is in a position because of some real or apparent authority over the other, or because of a fiduciary relationship, or because the other party's mental state is affected by either reason of age or illness or for any other reason. So in such situations, the party may be said to influence or may be presumed to be in a position to unduly influence the consent of such a party. Now, the kind of relationships in which the courts have upheld the presumption of undue influence, these include parent and child, spiritual advisor and disciple, trustee and beneficiary, doctor and patient, but not where a person is, say, just having a fever or is having a flu, cold, cough, and fever. We cannot say that doctor is in a position or is presumed to be in a position to dominate the will of the patient. But if, say, supposing a person has got a heart attack and there is no other doctor available in the vicinity, the hospital may be 25 kilometers away. In such a situation, doctor may misuse his position and ask for an unreasonable amount for treatment of the patient. In such a situation, we shall definitely say that doctor was in a position to dominate the will of the patient. Excuse me. Similarly, in case of a lawyer and a client, the courts have upheld the presumption of undue influence because a client generally confesses to the lawyer. He tells the truth and wants to be saved. Lawyer may misuse the information to blackmail and to obtain an undue, unfair advantage. So in India, the parents are even today deemed to be in a position to influence the will of the children. Now, when we are talking about the child here, we are naturally referring to a child who is of the age of majority. Whatever may be the real life situation, but the courts have accepted this presumption that a parent is in a position to dominate the will of the child, a child of the age of majority. Children are deemed to be still respectful to the parents in India. Spiritual advisor and disciple in the Indian context in particular, people have lot of regards, lot of respect for the spiritual gurus, spiritual advisor. So where a spiritual advisor promised an advanced seat in the heavens to a disciple and thereby induced that lady to transfer all her properties in his favor, it was held that the spiritual advisor was in a position to dominate the will of the disciple. So in India, the disciples have an unsuspecting faith in their gurus and shall be prepared to go to any extent if so advised by their spiritual guru or spiritual advisor. So these are some of the examples I have given you in case of the presumed relationships, where that means undue influence will be deemed to have been used. So the onus will be on the other party, that is the parent, the spiritual advisor, the trustee, the doctor, or the lawyer, and so on, that no undue influence had been used, and the other party had every chance to secure the appropriate advice from the appropriate people before having actually signed this particular agreement. Next element of free consent, that is absence of free consent, is fraud. What is a fraud? No, interestingly, students usually do not, no, they do not study the legal version of these common expressions like fraud, misrepresentation, mistake, etc. They believe कि यार इसमें क्या पढ़ना है, अब फ्रॉड में क्या पढ़ना है, अरे फ्रॉड तो रोज ही करते हैं यार, इसमें पढ़ना क्या है. And therefore, if in the examination a question on the subject comes, now then they feel at a loss what to write. ऐसा ही हुआ एक बार. I was the evaluator for the BCom program. It's long ago, way back in the 70s, 1970s. I was the evaluator for scripts in Hindi also. I had given my consent that yes, I can evaluate the scripts in Hindi medium as well. So one of the questions asked in the examination was, define fraud. धोखा शब्द को परिभाषित कीजिए. And one of the brilliant students answered it like this: धोखा बराबर है धो जमा खा. And he further went on to explain कि कोई भी व्यापारी अपने ग्राहक को पहले चिकनी चुपड़ी बातों से अच्छी तरह से धोता है और उसके बाद उसको लूट लूट के खाता है. ये है धोखा. You know, these kinds of answers will never fetch you any marks. Quite naturally, I did not award him any marks, and he landed with 0, a big 0. But that is the problem. Indian Contract Act, one comes across many such commonly used expressions, and students do not care to see the legal version thereof. If you look at the legal version, I'll show you the PPTs here. If you look up the legal version, section 17 defines fraud very elaborately. And the elements of fraud we may note as follows. Number one, that fraud is the active misrepresentation of a material fact. Two things. Now there has to be a misrepresentation, and that has to be deliberate, active, with a view to deceive the other party or with a view to induce the other party to enter into a contract. And that misrepresentation must be of a material fact. That is, whereby the other party is likely to be induced to make the transaction. So if, say, supposing Mr. X is wanting to sell his, let's say, Honda City 2020 model automatic, and knows fully well that his Honda City has never given him more than 10 kilometers a liter, represents to the proposed buyer that his Honda City gives 14 kilometers a liter and has never given less than that. Here he is making a misrepresentation, which is an active, deliberate misrepresentation to induce the other party to buy that particular car, and is certainly material, that of a material, a fact. So the transaction shall be said to be voidable when the other party gets to learn that the car does not give more than 10 kilometers a liter. Besides active misrepresentation of a material fact, fraud also includes active concealment of a material fact. So if, say, supposing a person goes to purchase a sari in a sari store, and that sari has a small hole, and the shopkeeper has put the price sticker on both the sides of the hole to actively conceal that defect, we shall say that fraud has been committed and the transaction shall be voidable. Then the third element of fraud is a promise made without any intention of performing it. So if a person makes a promise knowing fully well, say supposing borrows a sum of rupees 50,000 from a friend or even from a bank with the full intention of not repaying it, and let's assume it's a clean advance, no collaterals, one shall be said to be guilty of having committed fraud. Then the next element says any other act fitted to deceive. So this is a generic clause to take care of any of these circumstances which might not have been covered under the above. And lastly, it says any such act or omission which the law specifically declares to be fraudulent. So where law has declared any particular act or any omission to amount to fraud, that will be fraud. So that's about the meaning of the fraud. So far as consequences of the fraud are concerned, the contract is certainly voidable at the option of the party that has been defrauded, because the consent of that party was not freely obtained. And second effect shall be that a claim for damages can also be made. But please remember, damages by very definition are a monetary compensation for the actual loss suffered by the party. So damages shall be claimable only and only if the party has actually suffered a monetary loss. And also, these remedies will be available where the party has actually been defrauded. The rule of law is a fraud that does not defraud is no fraud. यानी आप किसी को धोखा देने की कोशिश करें और उसको धोखा ना हो तो उसे फ्रॉड नहीं कहें। या सेक्शन 19 ये भी कहता है कि अगर कोई ऐसी फैक्चुअल बात कही जाए जिसको दूसरी पार्टी के पास फैसिलिटी थी वेरीफाई करने की कि भाई ये जो इसने कहा ये सच है या नहीं, और फिर भी उसने उस फैसिलिटी का इस्तेमाल नहीं किया, तो लॉ कहता है कि पार्टी शैल नॉट बी सेड टू हैव बीन डिफ्रॉडेड। जैसे मान लीजिए कि कोई सैलरीड क्लास एम्प्लॉय है, वो बैंक के पास लोन लेने गया और फॉर्म में जब इनकम कॉलम आया तो उसने उसमें मान लीजिए ग्रॉस इनकम सिर्फ भर दी। जो डिडक्शंस हैं उसने लोन्स लिए हुए हैं कंपनी से उनके बारे में कुछ नहीं कहा, प्रोविडेंट फंड कटता है उसके बारे में कुछ नहीं कहा, इनकम टैक्स कटता है उसके बारे में भी नहीं कहा, और ये भी नहीं मेंशन किया कि ये ग्रॉस सैलरी अमाउंट है। Now, in a situation like this, the bank or any other lender had the opportunity of getting in touch with the company to find out the actual salary, or should have asked the particular borrower to get the facts duly attested from the employer. And if the bank or the lender has failed in this regard, law says the bank or the lender cannot be said to have been defrauded and may have no remedies at all. Similarly, we have a decided case law of Horsfall versus Thomas. Now, this is commonly called as a case of defective canon. Let me narrate to you the facts of the case, but before that, let me have a sip of water, please. In this particular case, a person went to an arms and ammunition dealer and wanted to buy a cannon. The dealer had only one cannon, which had been displayed outside, and that cannon was a defective cannon. The defect was that some ammunition had got stuck up in the cannon and could not be taken out. If it were to be forcibly taken out, then there was every possibility of the cannon exploding and running into pieces. So therefore, it was left as it is, stuck up at the mouth of the cannon. But the dealer, to conceal this defect, got a metal plug made and put it on the mouth of the cannon. अब वो stuck up जो ammunition था वो visible नहीं था. But this buyer who had come to purchase the cannon asked the dealer that he wanted to buy a cannon, and the dealer told him, "Sir, we have only one piece and that is out there. You may see." He checked up the price and did not even take the trouble of inspecting the cannon. He placed the order. He said, "Okay, the cannon is mine." The moment the cannon was moved for delivery, with the movement that ammunition, stuck up ammunition, got active, and the cannon went into pieces. It was held that the buyer had no remedies, and if he had already paid whatever money by way of advance, he was not allowed to take it back, because he was never defrauded by that attempt to fraud, having never gone close to the cannon. So the rule of law is a fraud which does not defraud is no fraud. Now, the next one we shall like to talk about the elements is misrepresentation. That is elements of absence of free consent. In case of misrepresentation, now there is once again a false or incorrect statement, but the intention is not to deceive. In case of fraud, the intention is to deceive. But here, the misstatement is being innocently made. The person making the misstatement, misrepresentation, honestly believes in the correctness of that particular statement. So, since the statement made is false, and that statement being the basis of the transaction, the contract is rendered voidable, but no damages can be claimed. All right. Whereas in case of fraud, damages are claimable. In case of misrepresentation, damages are not claimed. The other effect that the transaction shall be rendered voidable remains the same in both the cases, whether it is a case of fraud or misrepresentation. Now, since the lecture is becoming too long, I shall like to stop here. And the last element of absence of free consent, that is mistake, I shall take up in the next lecture. Till then, goodbye. Thank you very much for being with me. Thank you. All right.